Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to do my Wasteland Talks show, which talk about what it... Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to my show, Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this is part of my series of top 10 lists for the year 2022. And this time, it's my top 10 books that I read in 2022. I didn't read any books from 2022. So these are new reads that I did this year. And the big thing is, I used to be a huge reader. Reading used to be my thing well before movies were. I always enjoyed watching movies, but reading was really that thing, my biggest hobby. And unfortunately, I had to give away most of my books when I was in college for unfortunate reasons. And it kind of hurt my enjoyment and love for reading, and it was hard for me to get back into it. And it had been years since I regularly read, so I made myself a goal of reading 12 books this year, thinking, well, if I could get through one book a month, that would be great. I really stuck to this, and I read about 30 minutes every day, and I finished 53 books this year. So pretty excited about that, and I'm going to be talking about the top 10 books that I read this year that I want to talk to all of you about. So number 10, which is from Mitch Albom, The Next Person You Meet in Heaven. And I remember reading The 5 People That You Meet in Heaven and watching that TV special film that they made with John Voight in it, and reading Tuesdays with Morrie in school. I was really a big fan of Mitch Albom, and this was such an easy... I burned through this so quickly. It is a beautiful book about faith and love and all kinds of deep and emotional themes, as my lovely cat here wants to join in this talk, as I have all my books sprawled out in front of me. But this book is, I think, a wonderful sequel that builds off of the spirit of the first book and delivers an emotional and gratifying experience that I absolutely loved. So I was really excited to check it out, and I was very happy. My number 9, which is Bernhard Schlink's The Reader. Now, I'm a big fan of the film. I think it's some of Kate Winslet's most interesting work. And this story of a young man who falls in love with and builds this connection to a quieter, more introspective, middle-aged woman, this older woman, and they have this affair. This book is steamy and engrossing and hard to put down. And then where this story takes the reader is quite interesting, as there's a lot more to this woman as a character, as a person, than we could ever have imagined. And where this story takes this young man and his journey processing this relationship that he had with this woman while seeing where life has taken her is something really impressive, and it was an enthralling read. This was another one that was hard for me to put down. My next one, my number 8, which is Stephen King's Christine. You're going to see a lot of Stephen King on here, one of my favorite writers and someone who I dove headlong into a lot of his books this year. I had stockpiled them. And Christine, story of a murderous car. And there's a lot more emotion and supernatural elements to the book versus the film from John Carpenter. I feel like the film's a little bit more like streamlined kind of thing. There's a lot of character development. It captures that feeling of Stephen King where there's always so much more than meets the eye when it comes to his books and his stories. This isn't just some genre affair that doesn't have depth or human connection. And the struggle of these characters in dealing with what they're dealing with, and the draw to this evil car with this evil spirit inside trying to take advantage. It's a thrilling ride, and I absolutely loved it. Now, my number 7, another Stephen King, from his collection of books, Different Seasons, is The Body, which is what Stand By Me is based off of. And this is one of those coming-of-age stories from Stephen King that has a hard edge. There's some shocking and dark moments to it, similar to It. But this is a story of friendship and a journey. And I love the film Stand By Me. Rob Reiner does such an amazing job with the film. And this is a wonderful, engrossing novella that really has you connecting with these young people, processing the challenges of their lives, and in a deep and meaningful way. My number 6 is All About Me, My Remarkable Life in Show Business, the Autobiography of Mel Brooks. This was one of my favorite gifts that I've gotten from my wife. It's his voice from start to finish. I was laughing within the first page of this book, and it's a wonderful exploration of his career and his perspective on his career, and it's hilarious because it's him and you just read it in Mel Brooks' voice. I love Mel Brooks. He's one of my favorite filmmakers and one of the funniest people I think to ever live. And this book, him still now writing and doing all these things, is so impressive. And I could read him telling stories about his life for months and months and months and months. It would be an absolute pleasure. My number 5, which is David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. Now, I'm a bigger fan of the film than most. I thought how this film is structured in this onion of pulling back layers with all these stories, with these interlocking elements and these characters and ideas, these themes, this science fiction, fantasy smorgasbord of just amazing storytelling. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was such a bold and intriguing story, and how it plays out on page. I see more now that the film's a little bit clunky in terms of its storytelling approach, but just the way that this all comes together in such an impactful and poignant way. And there's so many deep ideas and themes and feelings to be had throughout this experience reading this book. My number 4, which is Martin Scorsese, A Journey. And this was also a gift from my friend Jim, for my 30th birthday, and this was such a fantastic read. This is from writer Mary Pat Kelly, and this leads up to, I think, right as Cape Fear was coming out, but this is such an interesting dive into Scorsese, his films, his filmmaking, and the people around him giving perspective on how these films came together and his journey. And I loved every second of reading this book. It gave me while doing my Welcome to the Wasteland series, this gave me so much extra depth and layers to what I was doing on my show. And I loved it. And I would love a sequel from Cape Fear on to now to see even more and get even more depth to what Martin Scorsese has done as a filmmaker. My number 3, which this is the heftiest one of all, which is the final book in Stephen King's The Dark Tower saga, The Dark Tower. This series is something else. This fantasy science fiction genre-bending western, neo-western amalgamation is such a crazy story. And Roland is such an intriguing character. The Dark Tower is such a compelling idea and MacGuffin to be chasing after. And finally getting resolution, reading all 70 of these books, and realizing that the end of this book is one of the most interesting and dynamic and memorable endings I've ever read in books. It made me so excited to go back and watch the actual film, The Dark Tower, because how they connect with each other. It was that powerful, my experience reading this book. It made me want to do that, which I don't think most people would agree to want to go back and watch that movie. But this is one of the greatest sagas, and when I found out Mike Flanagan got greenlit to make this series at Amazon, most anticipated television series, nothing else. I want this, 100%. Speaking of amazing television, which hopefully that will be, I finally bit the bullet And my number 2 is reading A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. And I couldn't put this down. I burned through this so fast. This just made me realize how great that first season of Game of Thrones is. And it's such a great adaptation, but like this book has so much depth and character and how they structure everything with each character getting their focus. Some of them I didn't care about as much. Like I didn't really care about Daenerys' stories a lot of the time, and some of the other ones, but like every time we go to Ned Stark or Jon Snow or Tyrion, and honestly even like Sansa, her perspective on things, like all of these characters in this wonderfully fleshed out world, I fell in love with Ned and Robert all over again. I think one of my favorite lines of dialogue from a character ever is in this book when Stannis wants to shut down all the brothels in King's Landing, and Robert's like, "You want to banish whoring? What are you going to banish next? Eating? Breathing?" Oh my god, I love it. Just, George R. R. Martin has something special here, and you better finish these books. That's all I'm going to say. And my number 1, Stephen King back at it again. One of my most anticipated sequels to read, Dr. Sleep. I love this film. I think Mike Flanagan's film is fantastic, and this book has a lot less to do with The Shining than the film, because he was kind of put into a corner like trying to make that a sequel to both the book and the film, The Shining. This story is so engrossing. I love just the idea of Danny growing up, having all these issues, having this mentor, Dick Halloran, and then paying it forward and becoming this mentor to this young woman. And just Rose the Hat and this whole entire crew of these soul-sucking vampires of life, of the shine. Just this story, this idea, and it's so perfectly written by Stephen King. I could even see where Mike Flanagan like really dug into things. Like that scene with the young boy baseball player is so much shorter in the book. Cause Stephen King isn't about as much like the gore and stuff like that, but like it was hard to read in the book even if it was that much shorter. This is one of my favorite stories. I think it's so compelling and interesting, and Stephen King is just the king of genre fare and makes such an engaging character-driven story here with so much depth, and even the villains, these antagonists, are so interesting to spend time with. But I had a great year reading books in 2022. Hopefully you got some books to check out based off of my recommendations. A lot of Stephen King. But hopefully you let me know. You have book recommendations for me. I'm always looking for more books to read. I only have a couple left. I had roughly 50 books piled up for 3 years, and I finally dug through all of them. And now, whole world open to new books. So if you have recommendations, put them in the comments. I'm always open to them. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.